Hey everyone, this is Aaron from MTGChallengers and welcome to another Magic the Gathering deck tech. Today we'll be going over a mono black aggro budget build for Khans of Tarkir standard. So this is a pretty affordable black aggressive deck. It can be built in its entirety for around $40 and it's surprisingly effective and can actually give some of the more expensive decks in the format a run for their money in some cases. The idea here is the exact same for pretty much any other aggressive deck. Play creatures and turn them sideways to get your opponent to 0 life as soon as possible. So let's discuss each individual card, starting with the 1-drops. First off, I have 4 Tormented Hero. Really not much to say about this card. The important thing is it's a 2-powered creature for 1 mana, which aggressive decks just love so much. The heroic is really pretty irrelevant. We aren't playing any auras or anything. We do have a few bestow creatures, but the ability won't come into play that often. Next, I have a much better 1-drop, Bloodsoaked Champion as a playset. A really tremendous card. Again, 2 power for 1 mana is always great for decks like this. He can't block, which isn't really that big of a deal actually. You want to be attacking with this deck most of the time anyway. The raid ability is really what pushes it over the top as a 1-drop. Again, this is an aggressive deck, so we're going to be attacking with things almost every turn, so his ability will come into play quite a bit. The final 1-drop I have is Gnarled Scarhide, 4 of him. Not quite as good as the champion, but a very solid 1-drop. Again, 2 power for 1, which is always welcome, and again, not being able to block usually isn't that big of a deal for this deck. The bestow is really where he shines. It's a great ability, can do it for 4 mana in the later game so that he has impact the turn he comes into play, which can be important. And if they remove the creature with a spot removal spell, or something global like Drown in Sorrow or Anger of the Gods, it falls off and becomes a creature on its own, so it can make those spells a lot less efficient. Next up, I have 2 Pain Seer. It's definitely not Dark Confidant, but in an aggro shell like this one, he works pretty well. 2 power means he can be fairly aggressive if need be, and since we will be attacking most of the time, the Inspired will be happening a decent bit. The ability can also make him a priority to be blocked, which can draw the blocks off of our 3-powered creatures, so that's another plus. The life loss will usually be pretty negligible. Our curve doesn't go above 3, except for Murderous Cut, which is why there are only 2 of him. Then I have a playset of Spiteful Returned, a really awesome card, basically a 3-powered creature for 2 if it isn't blocked, and in the later game makes it even better to pump something else up that's already a decent size so it can keep attacking in and knocking 2 life off of the opponent, which can definitely add up over time. Moving on up to the 3-drops, I have 4 copies of Grim Haruspex. A very solid creature. 3 power is really nice, up from 2 power that most of the other creatures in here have. The morph gives it a bit more versatility, which can be good, and the ability is really awesome for some card advantage. It can help you keep up with the cards against control decks, playing things like Dig Through Time and Jace's Ingenuity. Aggro usually has some issues in the mid to late game with cards since they just steam through their hand, and this can really help you avoid those issues. Next, I have a playset of Mogis' Marauder, one of the best cards in the entire deck. Since every creature in the deck has at least 1 devotion, he'll come down and give himself and all of your other guys on the field haste and intimidate, which is just a fantastic push. It usually gets through at least 6 damage if you're on curve, which is a huge punch, and at worst, if you top deck him or something, he's a 3 mana 2/2 with haste and intimidate, which is definitely solid. And the final creature I have in the deck is Herald of Torment, 4 copies of him. Flying is just awesome to have in general, especially early in the game, and it's something that not many other aggro decks have access to. The 1 life drawback is more than worth it, since you will ideally be closing the game out when you cast him anyway, and the bestow can be a real game changer. It can give you a 5-powered creature in the air, and even if they remove it with a hero's downfall or something, they're still left with the demon himself. Originally, I was running Master of the Feast in place of him, but I feel that the Herald is much better for aggro, mainly because with the bestow, he has an impact the turn he comes into play, which is just not possible with the Master. So that's it for the creature base. I do have a few other spells. Bile Blight is an awesome removal spell for this deck, and I'm running it as a 3 of. -3/-3 kills a good amount of relevant stuff in Standard. The mana dorks especially, like Elvish Mystic, Voyaging Satyr, and it does very well up against Elspeth and Garruk with their tokens. And of course, against any other aggressive deck in general with all their small creatures, it's basically a hero's downfall for 1 less mana. Next up, I have 2 Read the Bones. Really good card advantage spell for black. It's low cost, so it works pretty well with Pain Seer, and it can potentially dig you 4 cards into your deck, which can sometimes make the difference between losing and winning. It could mean getting that removal spell you need, or that Marauder for the final push, or something like that. And for the final spell, I have 3 Murderous Cut. I wanted a removal spell less circumstantial than Bile Blight, and for a budget build, this really was the best option. Should be Hero's Downfall, but that's really not conducive to the financial aspect of the deck. Still, the Delve can come in handy in the mid to late game to be able to cast it for a lot less. Then again, if you have a lot of stuff in the grave with this deck, that isn't necessarily a good thing, but it does happen. So that's it for the spells. Now we come to the mana base. It's extremely simple. It's just 22 lands, all of which are basic swamps. So it doesn't get much more budget friendly than that. Costs nothing, and it's nice to know that you'll never have to worry about any lands coming into play tapped. So that's what I have for the main board. For these budget decks, I always like to discuss a few changes that I would make to improve the deck for any of you out there who want to build the same basic deck but have a little bit more money to spend. In that case, I really only see 3 possible changes I would make. One is, like I said before, to put Hero's Downfall in place of the Murderous Cuts. Again, the cut can be really good sometimes with the Delve, but Downfall is just much more consistent overall and hits Planeswalkers, which is really fantastic. Another change I would probably make to the deck would be to put in some amount of Thoughtseize, either mainboard or sideboard. There are some great, affordable discard and disruption spells for black, but if you can afford it, I would just play Thoughtseize. And finally, and most expensive of all, I would consider taking out 8 of the swamps and putting in 4 Mana Confluence and 4 of either Caves of Kolios or Llanowar Wastes in order to splash an additional color for some stuff in the side. That way you would have access to more cards, which is always good, while keeping the land base perfectly fast and still always being able to tap for black. I'm not really sure which color would be better, that would really depend on your local meta, but if you can increase the deck's flexibility and versatility without sacrificing that aggressive tempo or the mana, I really don't see a reason not to. So those are the changes I would make to the deck. Let's discuss what I have in the sideboard. The first thing I have in the side is Typhoid Rats, 2 of them. You may not have thought of it, but it really is fantastic and cheap tech up against the bigger mid-range decks. They slam down their Siege Rhino or Polykranos, some big creature that they think they're just going to be able to roll over your little guys with, and then they end up having to trade with a 1/1 rat. It's really great. Next, I have 2 Grey Merchant of Asphodel. Like the Rats, it's good up against the mid-range decks, and up against control it can do very well too. It's mainly here to just give the deck the ability to play out a longer game. If they just have a bunch of creatures or not letting you get through for whatever reason, trying to stall the game out, you just hold back and play the Merchant. It's usually enough reach to close the game out. Then I have another 2 of, which is Dark Betrayal. It should be pretty self-explanatory when you side this in, up against any kind of black deck that runs creatures. You can take out your more expensive removal and have a really efficient 1-drop for the matchup. It's particularly good up against Mardu midrange, since it will kill Butcher of the Horde, which is their main win condition. I also have 3 copies of Despise, a really nice budget disruption spell. Probably should be Thoughtseize for the better options, and the life really doesn't matter for this deck, but this is definitely a very solid alternative. In particular, it's great up against Abzan midrange, since that deck is almost all creatures and planeswalkers, so it gets rid of their Siege Rhinos, their Wingmate Rocks, Ajani's, Sorens, all that stuff, which is good since that's the best deck in the format right now. Then I have some extra copies of cards I have in the main board. I have an extra Bile Blight, 2 more Read the Bones, and a 4th Murderous Cut. I've already discussed the utility of these cards. It's just nice to have extras in the side to increase the numbers when I go up against a relevant deck. And finally, I have 2 Whips of Erebos. Much like the Merchant, these are here to add some life gain to the mix to give the deck the ability to play out a longer game against the control and mid-range decks. The reanimation ability can also be nice to recover after a board wipe or something of that nature. So that's it for this deck tech. Be sure to check out our others. To see these decks in action, check out our gameplay videos. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like the Facebook page and consider making a donation to support the continuation of this project. Thanks for watching, and as always, subscribe for more Magic the Gathering content.